Well, hello and welcome to Pots and Trowels, and thank you for joining us. And I'm joined today with Jill, and we've got Sean with us as well.
Hi.
And we're going to talk loads and loads of gardening things with you. And we've got our special guest with us. We've got Arit Anderson from BBC Gardener's World, who's going to be having a chat about all that she's doing and her book. And loads more we're going to talk about. And Sean, did you say you'd got a question for me?
Well, we had a question on one of the videos. For those who don't know, we make videos as well, a weekly gardening video. Check it out on YouTube. Links will be in the show notes. But we've had somebody ask a question about salvia hot lips. They're asking if they need to cut it back every spring.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And they are a really, really lovely shrub. I mean, they always used to be thought to be tender, but they're not. They're as tough as old boots. They're one of the shrubby salvias, so not like the bedding plants. They do make a shrub. If we get a very bad winter, the top can be killed off, but they always grow from the root. So what I always tell people, if you're growing those shrubby salvia microphylla, then don't prune them in the autumn. Always wait until spring. And you've got two options. If it starts to bud up from all the old wood, you can leave it. But if you want to rejuvenate it and get some nice new strong growth, then March, April time is when you'd get your secateurs out, give it a good trim back. That will promote strong growth and then flowers later on in the season.
So why is it called hot lips?
It's called hot lips, Mrs. Fish, because the flowers they're bicoloured and it looks like a white flower with a big splodge of red lipstick on it.
Oh.
So, yeah.
I was having flashbacks to MASH. Is it MASH that had hot lips in it?
Oh, yes.
There you go.
Oh, you're showing your age, Sean.
I know a little bit. I know. Sorry about that.
There you go.
So we need to hear from our star guest. I mean, you've got a few more things we can be doing in the garden, but we'll perhaps come to those a little bit later. Should we go and hear from Arit?
Yeah, I think we should. Well, hello, Arit, and thank you very, very much for joining us for our first podcast. It's really great to have you, and thank you for sparing the time. And we've got to really say a big thank you to you, because without you, we probably wouldn't be doing a podcast, because you gave us a lot of encouragement when we were with you at the Malvern Autumn Show back in September. So thank you. We do appreciate it. Without you, we wouldn't be here.
Well, I have to say, I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed because look at this, weeks later, and I'm your first guest, which is, of course, a huge privilege to be with you both. But no, I think it's great. I mean, obviously, local radio, it's all been a bit tricky knowing, what's been going on with that. And I think that so many people love to hear from you two. You're so popular, and it would have been awful not to be able to hear all of your advice that you've got. And now we've got it recorded. We've got it in my back pocket. I can play you back. There's no escape.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't get away from us, Arit. So yes. So hopefully this is one of many, and we only did it because you said you would be our first guest. So that is the reason we're here. I'm sure lots of people listening will already know who Arit Anderson is. You're very, very well known in the gardening world. But for those that are new to gardening or only just joining us, just tell us a little bit about how you got into gardening, because I know you had a different career first. We're really pleased that you're now in the gardening industry, but tell us how that all came about.
Well, it was that classic thing, really, of getting to my sort of mid-40s, getting a house that had a garden that was, just for me, and really thinking, oh, I know, I worked in fashion at the time. So I thought, I know, I'll get my sister, who is a gardener. She'll come down and she'll set it up, and I would literally come in deadhead with wine. That was the plan.
Perfect.
That was perfect plan.
Yeah.
And sister did come down and help a little bit. But really, when it came to the thrust of the garden, she couldn't be there obviously all the time. And I just thought, well, I need to start. And I put a few plants in. And the next day, they were still there. Yeah. So I thought that's a good. I'm on track. So it really came about from having my own garden, and my phrase that my family call me, having a go. That's have a go, Anderson. That's what I'm like. And so when my sister came back down in the let's think about it. I got the garden. I got the house in September. Worked on the house a bit. Was working through the garden in that first season, and when she come down in the July, I think it was for Hampton Court. She was like, "Wow, you've done all this in such a short space of time." So I think that was it really, and I think it's like most people. Once you get started, sadly, well, not sadly, brilliantly, you can't stop. So I retrained. I left fashion and retrained, and I guess the sort of the lucky break, if you like, into the whole sort of media part of our lovely industry was having a show garden at Hampton Court in 2016. I hadn't long qualified. I thought I'd put myself, test myself. Could I actually get to do a show garden on my own? I'd had a little experience of it back in 2013 as a student with some other students. And so, it got televised. It was all about the environment in terms of our overuse of fossil fuel and that type of messaging, which was, I know it sounds crazy, but in 2016, we wasn't really talking about the environment and gardens in the same way. Of course, wildlife garden and everything had always been there, but it wasn't quite connected in the same way. So that got televised, and like all people that have to earn a living, and I was thinking, well, I'm still trying to build clients here. It's all a bit new. And so I literally said to the BBC, can I have a go? Can I have a go at presenting?
If you don't ask, you don't get, do you? That's right. And I think probably one of your very first television appearances for Gardener's World might have been when we met at the Chatsworth Flower Show, the RHS Chatsworth Flower Show, which I think from memory was, because they only did 3, they've finished now, but I think it was 2017. Would that be about right?
That sounds about right, because that's when I joined Gardener's World. I did my first episode in the March or something like that, or filmed it in the March, but it hadn't gone out at that point. And then I got an email from the production team at Chelsea. Or would you like to present some items on Chelsea? You kind of go, sorry, pinch moment, really? What? I don't even know what I'm doing. And so and then very quickly after that came Chatsworth, then I was asked to Hampton Court. So I mean, as you can tell, and you two both know, I like a chat.
Yeah. We haven't noticed that. Well, that's one of the, because it's obviously developed. You've done an awful lot on television and still do, and the environment is at the core of a lot of the work that you do, and climate change and gardening to adapt to climate change. And we get together quite a lot at the flower shows, at the RHS flower shows. So it's always lovely when we're booked to work there, and then we're told that Arit will be there, and we get to have our chats on stage. So, do you enjoy being at the flower shows? Because that's very different to presenting television, isn't it?
Oh, it's really different. I think the sort of the first few times I did it, I think people kind of expect that that's what you can just do, and they don't realise that that when you're filming, it's a really small team. There's a producer. Sorry, a director, a cameraman, a sound man, a researcher, and me. There's 5 of us. And what you don't think about when you're filming is that there's probably nearly 2 million people watching. Yeah. You can't think like that, otherwise you'd probably freeze. So you think, Jill, you know what it's like. You just kind of go, no, I can't do it.
Do you sort of focus on one person? Do you imagine one person? You're just chatting to a person who's watching.
Well, that's what the advice always is. Imagine when you're talking, especially when you're talking to camera, they'll say to you, imagine that you're talking to your mum or your friend. Yeah. The only thing is that if I was speaking to my mum, I'd probably miss out loads of words, talk too fast, let her finish my sentences. So it's not quite like talking to your mum. But you learn to look at the camera and think, yes, that there's somebody there. But that's why it's lovely when you come to the shows and you're doing audience talks, because even though at first it's a little bit daunting because you've got all these sea of faces in front of you, but you get a lovely feedback reaction straight away. If people are interested or asking questions. And obviously I request now always, can I come onto your stage, because I love having time with you both. And I think that's what's so great, is that you're sharing a lot of experience, sharing knowledge, and a lot of the audience, as well, they know so much as well, so they also love it because they can also participate. So that's what's really nice.
It is nice. And I having done radio and some television in the past, and still we do the podcast version of the YouTube version of Pots and Trowels, of course, every week. I still love doing the flower shows, because you are in front of a live audience, aren't you? You can actually see the audience, you can get their responses, and just have a chat to them. So I think it is a really good mix to be able to do that as well.
You find out what's going right for gardeners this time of year, whenever the show is, and what's going wrong as well. So you get a real flavour of gardening here and now, don't you, at the flower shows? I think that's important.
Yeah,
it is.
Very important. And I was going to say, well, the difference to what I used to do is that, if I was when I worked in fashion, and it was for high street brands at their head offices, and of course our equivalent designers would have been Gucci and Dolce and Gabbana and all the big shows, and no, we never got to hang out with the people that were the next sort of league up from us, if you like. So I think that's what's so great about our industry, is it's very accessible, that you can get to sort of meet the growers, the actual people that are supplying. You get to meet suppliers, you get to meet people like your good selves. You get to meet the garden as well team. You really can be in amongst it at the shows, and I think that makes it very special.
And you are very good at engaging with the nurseries. That you go round and you chat to them about the plants and any issues they've got, and they really do appreciate that, Arit. And that's something that we want to do on the podcast here. We want to, over the coming months, is to get some of those nurseries and get some of that specialist knowledge from them, so that we can share it, because we need to promote those nurseries, don't we, specialist growers?
No, definitely. You are both very good at that, and I think obviously, the amount of years and experience that you've got, you really understand how that can be lost. If we don't celebrate what the nurserymen do, and I think it's also about being able to inspire the next generation. I know it sort of always sounds like a cliche to say that, but it's so important. And I'm like you, a big advocate of communication. And a lot of the time, the nurserymen are in the field, literally. So I think they're going to love coming onto the show. I'm coming onto the podcast and being able to chat about what they do. So yeah, brilliant. That's great to hear.
One of the things that I know a lot of the audiences like to hear about, Arit, is your garden, and what you actually do, because it's great when you can walk around some of the show gardens at the shows and in the nursery marquee as well. But they like to have a little insight into your garden. So can you just give us a little taster of what your garden's looking like at the moment?
Well, my garden at the moment needs a bit of a sweep up, actually.
Oh, snap.
needs a little bit of a sweeping up. I'm sort of leaning out as I'm talking to you now. No, so my garden is, recently I'd had some new landscaping done in there, because with the family being there, nobody could actually really get into the garden for all of the pots I used to have. And so I said to my partner, okay, we'll do an edit so that there is actually a little walkthrough. And also I did end up having to have a little studio office put in the garden, because I work from home. Yeah. So that's been exciting. So what that's meant is that some of the borders have been reshaped, and I lost some things, and so this autumn I did a bit of spring planting, but to be fair, it goes against the grain, I think, for me to do it in the spring, because what happened was that I sort of put them in, and then of course quite quickly we're out and on the road, and wasn't really able to look after certain things, and I cheated on a couple of things. Oh, come on, Mr. Achille, you can cope with a bit more shade. Well, of course it can't, because I wanted it.
And sit there.
We all do it. We all try and push the limits and the boundaries, don't we?
Yeah, we think that we've got an extra little bit of sunshine that's going to come in. It's like that. So I've got to do some, which I'm looking forward to. I've got to get back into those borders, get some new plants in there as well. So I'm lucky that my the shrubs and the small trees that I've got, so they've matured nicely. So now it's the understory that needs to be redone. And I had I've got some containers. I have a little side turn. I've only just so that the listeners know, I have got a small garden, and I mean it's 10 meters by 4 meters, which I think in old money is what, that's 30 foot by
30
12
feet. Yeah, something like that.
something ish like that. And bear in mind that the studio takes up 3 meters, i.e. another 10 foot. So it is pretty bijou. It's bijou.
You have to make the most of the space that you've got then in that case, don't you? There's nothing nothing going spare.
No spares. So we put on, so one of the sides, one neighbour, they've got we've got a wooden fence up, and so what I've done with that is I've just put up some the mesh, what do you call it? The reinforcing mesh that you would normally put in for concrete.
Oh yes,
I know
the one.
The big square,
yeah.
Rebar, the rebar mesh. Is that it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it goes rusty, doesn't it?
That's it. Well, a friend of mine gave me that as a good idea, because when fences have fallen down before or been a bit decrepit, she's put those up in front of a fence, so like for a client's boundary, so that you can still put climbers up it without it pulling down the fence. Yeah. So I've had that put up, so I'm looking forward to getting some climbers up there. I've got my a smaller espalier apple tree which now needs to be tied in. So now I've got to try and make use of my verticals as well as my sort of floor space, as it were. So I've got a bit more work to do. I think people have sort of said, "Oh, well, we see it on Gardener's World." It's like, "Oh, not yet."
And for the planting, for the sort of lower growing, are you a perennial fan? Are you going to get some perennials in there as well?
Yeah, definitely a perennial fan. I think the thing that what's happened, Jill, is hence me pushing the extra Achillea in there that's saying no thanks. It used to be a sunny border, and because now some of those shrubs and, like I said, small trees have grown up, and I get a lot more dappled light. It's me this time round saying, and I've been watching the light levels, saying, come on, you've got to shift what you had before, and you've now got to adapt it to being a little bit more of a dappled shade border. But my premise of what I'm trying to do, so maybe I'll be getting some top tips off of you guys later as well. But what I'm trying to aim for are plants that are edible. And when I say edible, that doesn't have to just be to me. It could be a food source edible for other little species. I'm trying to look for pollinating plants, obviously, and also plants that maybe might have had a medicinal background to them. Because my way back when I used to do pharmacy. So I used to do that. But that is quite a tall remit to do, because of course if you just go for what you visually like all the time, you don't always tick some of those boxes. So I'm going to have to see where I can get to with that, really.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Oh well, I feel another episode of a podcast coming on to talk about those plants at some point.
I think you might have to get me back.
The ideal time for doing the research is over the winter, isn't it? And then you know what you want then in the spring, and when you go to all the flower shows, then you can chat to the exhibitors as well, the nursery growers.
Yeah, exactly.
And really know what you want to put in.
But we're here now, autumn, and there's some lovely autumn tints starting to develop. As I've been driving around lately, the trees are colouring up, people's gardens are starting to look like they've got a bonfire in them. So I'm going to be doing some autumn planting as well. If you were to plant something new in your garden this autumn, Arit, and you wanted it for autumn interest, is there anything that you would particularly go to?
Well, good question, because obviously in a small garden, you have to make choices as to where you want the crescendo of your plants to come to, I think. I think sometimes, because of course there is that conversation, isn't there, about year-round interest. And you can achieve that better in a bigger garden. And I think sometimes in smaller gardens, or in fact any of the gardens that I might put plants into, I try to think of little crescendos. However, that said, it's nice if you can put maybe one or two things in per season to get you going. So what I was looking at is I think I might look at some winter colours, some clematis. like clematis freckles, so
lovely.
that you've got because I think that it would be great if you can actually see something from the window, because obviously a lot of plants in the winter time become smaller and a little bit more lower to the ground. So things like hellebores, which are lovely, but of course, that they're kind of much more in the border. So I think maybe looking at climbers is always quite a good idea, because then obviously you can see them a little bit further. So I might be looking to that. And also, I'm just debating whether or not I've got space to put in some winter honeysuckle, because again, I think winter scent. I did have I used to have a Daphne, and I loved it, and it was there for some years. And of course, guess what? It got to its ultimate height and spread. And when you've got a 1.5 meter Daphne in a border that is only maybe 4 meters, you go, oh, at the time when I planted that in, obviously I hadn't done spacing. So I think that's going to be something that I'm going to look at. I know that I've got in a container, I've got a Laura petalum in a little container, which what I do with that, it's only little, the container, and then I kind of put it to one side during the summer months because it can deal with sort of part shade, and then it's at this time of year that it can come back out again, and it's got some bulbs in there as well. So that's the thing to do. So, but there's lots, isn't there, for winter?
Oh yeah,
really.
and I think some of the ones you've chosen there are really good, because like the clematis, Serosa freckles, and there's another lovely one, I think it's Wisley cream, isn't there? They're all these winter flowering clematis with those lovely delicate little bell flowers. People think of clematis in the summer, but you can get them pretty much to flower right the way through the winter. So I think that's a really good choice. We're going to add that to our list.
Tell me about freckles then. I like the sound of it.
It's got it's a small flower. Don't think of a big showy clematis. It's a very pale background, sort of creamy with darker flecks on it. Looks like freckles on your face.
Well,
They are really, really dainty plants, but in the winter I think you appreciate those sort of flowers more than you would in the summer. So good choice.
Yeah, they're good. And I think another little tip I was going to sort of say to people, which again, I have a client that does it, and I'm lucky I'm able to do it in my garden. I have one little table, is sometimes lifting containers up onto tables or raised beds if you've got them, so that again it's being able to see them, because as we were just sort of saying, the flowers are normally smaller at that time of year. So if you make up a container, make sure that you get it in view of the window, because you're not going out in the garden as much as you would be. So I think that's sort of something that I would do as well.
Yeah, as you mentioned, hellebores, and then later on, in the spring, snowdrops. You don't see the magnificence of snowdrops when they're down on the ground, unless you're sort of kneeling around and crawling, looking at them. So yeah, that's a really good idea to really appreciate some of those flowers.
Good. Right, well, what we're going to do, Arit, is take a little break. We can charge our coffee cups. I've got a few jobs to do in the garden, and then we're going to come back and chat a little bit more about your book and the podcast that you do. So we'll catch up in a minute.
Great. I'll see you after my tea break.
I like this idea of having a glass of wine and just deadheading and pruning. That really appeals to me.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Talking about deadheading and pruning, is this the right time for that sort of thing? It depends obviously on the plant, doesn't it, Mark? What should we be doing in the garden now?
Well, there's still quite a lot. Here we are now in November, so it's well and truly into autumn. But, loads to do. First thing I think is very soon the leaves are going to start falling off the trees, and we've got quite a few trees around us. So we know from last year we got a lot of leaves out of the garden.
Yeah, I used a leaf vac a lot of the time, didn't I?
Yes, you did, and you like that, didn't you? I always said I'd buy Jill a new vac. And for Christmas, and there it is for collecting leaves. And if you've got trees in your garden or shrubs in the garden, or even trees around you, try and get some of those leaves, because it's great to put them in a compost bin. If you've got a little compost bin or a compost heap in your garden, perfect time to start, because with mixing leaves from the trees and a few grass clippings, and as you start cutting down perennials and old vegetable waste, put that in a compost bin. They all mix together and make a really good compost for the garden. By next spring, late spring, early summer, you can use that on your garden to improve the soil. So great time to do that now. Definitely.
We've got a really small garden here. We're in suburban Nottingham here, and we don't actually have a compost bin. In fact, we put stuff in a green compost bin for the council, but presumably you could have a compost bin that takes up the same amount of space in your garden, I suppose, than one of those bins. I mean, these ones you see that that are kind of plastic ones that sit in the corner of the garden, they're all right, are they?
They are, yeah. I mean, the thing with composting, the bigger the volume of waste, the hotter it will get. It's all about generating heat. So if you've got them in a tiny bin, it cools down quicker, the heat goes. So if you've got a bigger bin, then it will rot down faster. But there are some now called sort of hot box compost bins that are insulated. And there are some quite slender ones, almost like a tower, insulated sides, put your waste in that, keeps the heat, and they work really, really well. And I mean, we've got a crude version of that, sort of a prototype somebody made us years ago, and in the summer when we're adding waste to it, if you take the lid off,
it's steaming, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you could cook a joint.
I think you could put some jacket potatoes in the middle of it, couldn't you?
It's like
I remember that from when we did Pots and Trowels live. We had a look inside it, and it was steaming away. But I reckon slow cooked lamb. What do you reckon? Just over the weekend.
Exactly,
nice.
Exactly. A joint of a ham in there or something would be delicious, wouldn't it? Yeah. So no, that is something you can definitely be doing. It's also time still to plant bulbs if you've still got some bulbs that you haven't planted. If you bought your daffodils and haven't got them in because it's been quite wet, try and get them in. I always say by the end of October, but we've missed that slightly. But I've got to admit, we've still got some to plant, and we're just waiting for the soil to dry just a little bit. And other bulbs you can plant are garlic. Garlic is great to plant in the garden.
Sean, have you tried elephant garlic before?
No, I've not.
Rather than the ordinary garlic, it's much bigger.
Well, I'm guessing the size is a thing, but sometimes with certain vegetables, the larger it gets, the less flavour you get. Is that the same here?
It's a milder flavour than garlic.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
But is it the same? Is it just a variation? It's just a strain of garlic, is it?
No, it's more closely related to leeks than the actual garlic family, but it resembles garlic in appearance, and it's really good. We're planting some. In fact, you can see the video on our YouTube channel. If you want to know how to plant garlic, then look out for that.
And it roasts really nicely as well, and then that just really brings out the sweetness of the flavours.
Have you now? Quick side question here. Then, have you used the alpaca beans we mentioned in last week's episode yet? Because I believe
we've got them. They've arrived in the post. We thought, what's this little parcel? And it said to Martin and Jill on the envelope. I thought, that's very informal. It's from Sean. And they're actually sitting in the office in their little sort of like a Hessian bag. No smell really.
Well, it's got an earthy smell.
Yeah, but not a pooey
does smell a bit.
Yeah.
Not pooey smell.
So for those who haven't listened to our previous episode, alpaca droppings, shall I say, alpaca beans they call them, apparently are an excellent fertiliser. So I sent some to Martin and Jill to test out. So
what should we use them on?
What they get.
What are you going to test them on?
We could save them. I suspect they're going to be quite high nitrogen. So maybe when this garlic grows, not this time of the year, but in the spring when we would feed it, maybe we sprinkle the alpaca beans around the garlic and see if it gives them a boost.
Okay.
We need to do we've got 2 rows we're planting, so we could feed 1 row with it and 1 without and see if there's a difference.
Oh, I like that idea. Yes. Yeah, a bit of a kind of blind test almost. So shall we hear more from Arit then?
Yes, I think so, because, we want to find out about the book. She's written a fantastic book. So, let's go back to Arit. Right, we're back with Arit Anderson, who's joined us as our special guest on this, our first proper podcast here on Pots and Trowels. And Arit, we've learned all about how you got into gardening. We've talked about the shows, but it's a very interesting project that you've been working on and is now come to fruition is your new book, The Essential Tree Selection Guide, which is an amazing book. We got a preview look at it again at the Malvern Autumn Show. So tell us a little bit about that and how it came about, because this is not an ordinary tree book. This has got a very interesting backstory to it, hasn't it?
Well, how it came about, Martin, yes. A publisher approached me and said, would you like to write a book? And I was like, well, yeah, of course, that's so amazing. And we chatted a bit and we decided that, that trees were a good thing to talk about, obviously, given where the environment is at the moment. And I really felt that as much as there are a lot of great books out there, there wasn't a tree book that I'd found that had given what to choose for a changing climate, because that's the big deal. And trees are obviously the biggest investment that we can make within our gardens and obviously within the landscape. They take a lot of time to come to maturity, many of them, not all, but many take, oak, keeps going still 1,000 years on. Whereas you can kind of get something like a lovely birch that's sort of reaching maturity within sort of, 30, 40 odd years. So it was important to get a book where there was enough science behind it, but it was also going to be accessible for the amateur gardener to be able to read as well. We wanted it to appeal to professionals. So I did collaborate on the book with a fantastic scientist, Dr. Henrik Herkman. He'll always tell me off for pronouncing his name wrong because he's Swedish, but he's brilliant. But the way that he talks about trees and how he really gets us to think about trees is about bringing a new language to how we select our trees. So I think it's fair to say that a lot of times people look at height and spread and season of interest, which is fair enough. That's fair, especially in small gardens. You want to know how big is that tree going to get to. But there's so much more that trees offer. They have a lot of hidden benefits that we don't really stop to think about on a daily basis. We know the obvious ones, oxygen providers, obviously, and taking in the carbon dioxide. They're fantastic carbon sinks, as we know. They store carbon for us, but they're habitats to so much wildlife. They shade for us. They do cooling in the summertime. They act as windbreaks. They're fabulous as flood mitigators. They help us filter pollution. All the things that are really bombarding us at the moment within our environment. There's pretty much something that a tree can do to help in many of our situations in our gardens.
Absolutely. And there is a tree literally for every situation, isn't it? Gardens large and small, wet soils, dry soils. And the great thing about this book is it gives you so much information. It's not, as you say, just height, season of interest. It's, what they are good at doing, how much carbon they store and oxygen they give off. So, I'm hoping that this book will find its way into my Christmas stocking, Mrs. Fish. Hint, hint, say no more. Because I've had a look at it, but I think, yeah. So, did you make a mental note of that? Good.
And a big stocking.
And where because this book is now, it's out there, it's been published. I know you're promoting it. Where can people buy it? In just sort of all over in bookshops and normal places?
Yeah. It's and hopefully in all of the sort of normal bookshops that are on the high street. We're trying to make sure that it is a big book, so there's are going to be big stockings. But it's in a lot of the regular shops, on the online bookstores as well. I don't want to promote any above any others.
No.
And Philbert Press is our publisher, and people could go onto the Philbert Press website as well and be able to buy from there. So I think what this book is as you say, Martin, it's to explain to people, to help people to understand how trees operate. It's really easy just to want to run to the A to Z of any tree book and just go, I want to look at what colours to have and stuff. But really, we invite the reader to get behind how these trees function and what benefits they can give, so that when you're deciding which tree you want, you can understand, actually, I've just chosen a tree that lives on the side of a mountain, and I'm trying to now put it into a garden that's sort of sunbaked, that should be somewhere like from the Mediterranean.
Exactly, yeah. No, and that information is important. And I love trees. We're fortunate that in our garden we've already got a few trees, and that we've got borrowed trees from the land around us. But I've got room, I think, for another 3 or 4 medium-sized trees in the garden, so I can do my research. So it's yes, Christmas is coming, Mrs. Fish. So no, it's good. Well, I hope it really goes well, because I think it's a sort of book as well that, as well as people wanting to know for their own gardens, that designers, landscape designers and architects will get a great deal out of a book with all this extra knowledge in there as well. So well done, you, Arit.
Thank you. Thank you.
You also do podcasts yourself, don't you? I know you were told that's how it came up in conversation when you tried to twist our arms to do this one, which worked. So what sort of podcasts and which ones are you doing at the moment?
So I've been really fortunate that the Gardener's World magazine, who have a huge bank of podcasts on their portal, as it were, and they're able to put in all the different presenters to kind of do different podcasts. But I was asked to do specifically a series called Growing Greener. And so this is the second series that's out now, and each program or podcast, I should say, is looking at a specific subject around how to garden sustainably. And I think the great thing with podcasts, hopefully you're going to experience as you go further and further on, is that you can sort of dive deeper into a subject a little bit more than maybe if we're on the telly and we get to do Gardeners World, we get 7 minutes. And if I'm talking about artificial lawn or peat or watering regimes, you only get a 7-minute segment. But on a podcast, we can talk about it with an expert for up to 30 minutes and really help the listener to understand all the different things that are going on. So I've really enjoyed the series, talking to some people who are passionate about how we can all do better. And as gardeners, I think that ultimately that's all we want to do, but there's so much information out there now, so it's trying to keep things succinct to help people understand what to do for the best.
Yeah, so that's one that people could, and because the great thing about podcasts, because I'm new to this, I'm a bit of a dinosaur, it's there forever, isn't it? It's not live and gone, you can access them at all times. So
dip in and out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good.
It.
Well, it's been really, really good catching up with you, and we do appreciate you spending the time. I know you're very busy at the minute, and you've taken some time to talk to us on this very first Pots and Trowels podcast. We will speak to you again, I'm sure, and obviously we're looking forward to seeing you at the flower shows next year on the circuit.
Where can we follow you in the meantime, Arit? Have you got socials that we can be looking at?
Yeah, I tend to keep my Instagram as up to date as I can. I'm not the best, but I am on there. And that is at Arit Anderson. I kept it simple because I had these fanciful names, and then people said we can't find you. So so just put my name into Instagram, and it would be lovely I try to interact with people that respond to any of the posts as well. So it'd be lovely to hear from people.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's great. Arit, thanks again, and take care, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
At the flower shows.
See you at the shows, and good luck with the podcast. I can't wait to keep hearing it. Bye.
It was great to talk to Arit. She's such a lovely lady, and it's so interesting to hear how her career has moved her on from one thing to another, isn't it? And now she's into gardening and passing on all that advice and knowledge. Yeah,
and she cares greatly about the environment. So a lot of her work is, like the tree planting, is to plant things that grow in the right climate. So really good to catch up.
I thought that was really.
And we'll get her back another day. Yeah, we will get her. She'll come back again.
Excellent. Well, the stuff about having a book that helps you with that kind of the trees, the climate. I think that's really important. My mum goes around collecting seeds, tree seeds, to try and distribute them and plant more trees up in the Lake District. So, hi mum, if you're listening. I also liked a couple of the tips, like the idea of lifting the containers up off the floor. Just to give a bit of. And that's something we've done. We've got an old garden table and we grow lettuce on it because it seems to keep it away from the slugs. So I don't know. That's just in our heads, but the lettuce seems to survive.
Well, it does, but it also means, you're not bending down to pick the lettuce or so. It's at waist high. And it's true, if you've got small plants in pots, you can see them if they're at that table height. So, whether it's a table or a chair or anything in the garden, just get them off the ground.
And the spacing as well was the other thing. She's talking about spacing large shrubs and large plants in small spaces, and you forget, amateurs like me forget how big a plant can grow when you first plant it. You think, oh, that looks good there, but then a year later you're sort of going,
Sean, don't worry about it. Professionals like me also make the same mistake. You always think, well, it does get big, but it won't quite get as big for me, or I can prune it, or
just put this little oak sapling in the corner here. That'll be fine.
I know. And I think, when you're planting a garden and you've got shrubs in 2-3 litre pots, they're not very big, so you'd always tend to put things a bit closer, because it might grow 3 meters across, but you don't want to wait 20 years, so you always put them a bit closer. So yeah, we all make that mistake, but I think especially in a small garden you've got to be more conscious of it and buy plants that are suitable for it. So
yes, yeah, I know,
worth
it makes it
thinking about.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point actually, because there might be people out there who are wondering about moving plants, and those sorts of questions are things that we can address, aren't they? You know, if people have questions, they can send them to us, info@potsandtrowels.com. That's our email address, info@potsandtrowels.com. Or just go to potsandtrowels.com. That's potsandtrowels.com. Are you impressed with how I did that?
Very good.
You could see the cogs whirring in my brain as I was
You weren't really reading
how to spell.
No, please do send in any gardening questions, because I do miss answering gardening questions on a Sunday morning on local BBC radio. So, you know, I've got to get my fix of answering your questions. So send them in and we'll answer as many as we can.
And I'll be giving some tips of what to do with kale, because we've got a load of kale in our veg plot, haven't we? So I'm thinking of loads of ways of cooking it up, because it is a superfood. So we need to get as much of that as we can.
That's right. And we'll have another special guest next week, won't we, with us? So,
fantastic.
Yeah,
so make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Send us an email if you've got a question. And yeah, we'll be here next week. The plan is to put these out Sunday morning. So hopefully next Sunday you'll be listening to us and subscribed.
So we'll see you next time on Pots and Trowels.
Bye.
Bye.
Watch the videos on YouTube or Facebook, follow us on Instagram, Twitter or X, and subscribe to the podcast and never miss a thing. For more information, go to potsandtrowels.com.